If that engine hits 9,000 RPM, pull the driver off the track. The words hung in the air for barely a second before the laughter started. Some people smirked. Others shook their heads. And the woman standing at the center of the garage didn't even bother hiding her irritation. What none of them knew was that the quiet single father they were about to throw out had built every championship race car this company had ever celebrated. The headquarters of Hayes Velocity Racing sat beneath the bright Nevada sun, its glass walls reflecting endless stretches of desert sky. Inside the main engineering bay, dozens of mechanics, technicians, and designers moved between half-disassembled race cars worth more than most American homes. Hydraulic lifts hummed. Air tools clicked. Monitors glowed with streams of performance data. The entire building pulsed with anticipation for the upcoming Desert Crown Grand Prix, the biggest race of the season. At precisely 8:14 that morning, Victoria Hayes stepped onto the polished floor of the engineering center. At 35, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had inherited a legendary company and spent years proving she deserved to lead it. Her navy blazer looked sharp enough to cut glass. Her blonde hair was tied neatly behind her head. Every conversation seemed to quiet whenever she entered a room. "Status on Car 7?" she asked without slowing her pace. Engineers exchanged nervous glances. "Almost ready," one answered. "Almost?" Victoria replied. "The race is 4 days away." Her heels clicked against the concrete floor as she approached the vehicle. Then she stopped. The hood was open. Several technicians stood frozen around the engine bay. And leaning over the exposed powertrain was a man wearing gray coveralls stained with oil and years of hard work. Ethan Brooks. 42 years old. Maintenance technician. Single father. The man most employees barely noticed. Victoria narrowed her eyes. "What exactly is happening here?" No one answered immediately. Ethan slowly straightened and wiped his hands with a shop towel. His expression remained calm. The cooling system was about to fail under sustained load, he said. "I fixed it." Silence settled across the garage. Victoria stared at him as though she had misheard. "You fixed it?" "Yes." "Who authorized that?" Ethan folded the towel carefully. "Nobody." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Your maintenance," Victoria said. "You clean equipment. You don't modify race engines." Several employees lowered their eyes. Ethan's voice remained steady. "I didn't modify anything. I prevented a failure." Victoria crossed her arms. "That decision wasn't yours to make." Ethan looked at the engine one last time. The driver could have been put at risk if nobody noticed it. "Enough." Her voice echoed through the bay. "You ignored company procedure. You interfered with a race vehicle without authorization. Effective immediately, you're terminated." A few people inhaled sharply. Nobody spoke. Ethan simply nodded. No argument. No anger. No pleading. He removed his employee badge and placed it gently on the nearest workbench. The gesture somehow made the room even quieter. Victoria watched him with cold certainty. "Security will escort you out." Ethan picked up his worn toolbox. Then he paused beside Car 7. His eyes lingered on the engine for a moment. "One more thing," he said. Victoria sighed impatiently. Ethan looked directly at her. "If that engine reaches 9,000 RPM, pull the driver off the track." A mechanic laughed softly. Someone else rolled his eyes. Victoria shook her head. "We're done here." Ethan nodded once and turned toward the exit. The automatic doors slid open. Bright desert sunlight spilled across the floor. And as he walked away, not a single person in that building realized they had just fired the man responsible for every winning race car in the company's history. The massive garage felt strangely different after Ethan left. The usual confidence that filled Hayes Velocity Racing had been replaced by something harder to define. It was subtle. A hesitation. A quiet uncertainty lingering beneath the noise of impact wrenches and computer fans. Victoria Hayes refused to acknowledge it. She stood inside the engineering conference room overlooking the production floor while performance charts, glowed across a 40-inch display. "I want final diagnostics completed before tonight," she said. "No delays." The lead engineer nodded. "We are running another full simulation." "Good." Victoria turned toward the glass wall. Below, technicians continued preparing Car 7. Everything appeared normal. Yet the image of Ethan calmly removing his badge kept replaying in her mind. Not because she regretted firing him. At least that was what she told herself. It was the way he had spoken. No anger. No desperation. Just certainty. Meanwhile, 20 miles away, Ethan drove his aging pickup through the quiet suburbs outside Las Vegas. The truck rattled slightly whenever it passed over uneven pavement. The radio remained off. He preferred the silence. By the time he pulled into the driveway of his modest single-story home, the afternoon sun was beginning its slow descent across the Nevada sky. The front door burst open before he even stepped out. "Dad!" Lily Brooks raced down the walkway carrying a cardboard model race car she had been building for weeks. Her brown ponytail bounced behind her. "You are home early." Ethan smiled. "Looks that way." Lily studied his face carefully. She had inherited her mother's ability to notice things adults often missed. "Did something happen?" Ethan lifted the model gently from her hands. "Nothing we cannot handle." She followed him inside. The small house smelled faintly of fresh cookies and motor oil. Family photos covered one wall. In nearly every picture, Ethan stood slightly behind everyone else, smiling quietly. Lily sat at the kitchen table while Ethan poured 2 glasses of lemonade. "Did they listen about the engine?" she asked. Ethan paused for a second. Then he smiled. "No, sweetheart." Lily frowned. "But you said it was important." "It is." "Then why would they ignore you?" Ethan looked out the window toward the fading sunlight. "Sometimes people only hear titles. They forget to listen to people." Lily considered that answer seriously before nodding. Across town, technicians launched another performance simulation. Data streamed across multiple monitors. Temperatures remained stable. Fuel pressure looked normal. Then a vibration warning briefly flashed across one screen. "Did you catch that?" one engineer asked. Another technician shook his head. "Probably a sensor glitch." The warning disappeared. Work continued. Nobody investigated further. By evening, most employees had gone home. Only a skeleton crew remained. The giant facility echoed with distant footsteps and humming equipment. Car 7 sat alone beneath bright overhead lights. A senior mechanic named Walter Jensen stopped beside it on his way out. He had worked at Hayes Velocity Racing for nearly 3 decades. His eyes drifted toward the engine compartment. Then he remembered Ethan's final words. "If that engine reaches 9,000 RPM, pull the driver off the track." Walter frowned. For reasons he could not explain, the sentence did not sound like a warning from a maintenance worker. It sounded like a warning from the man who knew the engine better than anyone alive. The next morning arrived with clear skies and rising desert heat. By 7 o'clock, Hayes Velocity Racing was already alive with activity. Forklifts moved equipment across the paddock. Engineers reviewed telemetry reports over coffee. Mechanics checked every bolt, sensor, and connection on Car 7 as preparation began for the final high-speed test before race weekend. Victoria Hayes stood beside the timing wall studying performance projections. On paper, everything looked excellent. The engine was producing record numbers. Fuel efficiency remained strong. Every department reported confidence. Yet an uncomfortable feeling continued to follow her. It was irrational, unwelcome, and impossible to explain. "Ready for the RPM stress test?" asked the lead engineer. Victoria nodded. "Run it." Moments later, the driver eased the car onto the private test circuit behind the facility. The engine note echoed across the Nevada landscape. Smooth. Controlled. Powerful. Everyone watched the monitors. 7,000 RPM. No issues. 7,500. Stable. 8,000. Temperatures normal. Several engineers exchanged satisfied smiles. One even laughed quietly. "Looks like yesterday's warning was nothing after all." Victoria said nothing. The driver accelerated down the long back straight. 8,300 RPM. 8,500. The race car sliced through the morning air with flawless precision. Then a small amber indicator blinked across one monitor. A vibration alert. "Did you see that?" asked the technician. Another checked the screen. The warning disappeared almost immediately. "Probably interference." The test continued. 8,700 RPM. 8,800. The room grew quieter. Walter Jensen stood near the back of Mission Control watching the numbers climb. He remembered Ethan's voice. Calm. Certain. "If that engine reaches 9,000 RPM, pull the driver off the track." Walter shifted uneasily. "Maybe we should slow it down," he said. Nobody responded. The driver entered the next straightaway. 8,900 RPM. A second warning appeared. This time 2 monitors flashed simultaneously. Several engineers leaned forward. "What is that?" one asked. Data streamed rapidly across the screens. Tiny fluctuations appeared inside the cooling system. Temperatures remained acceptable, but something deeper was changing. Something hidden. Victoria narrowed her eyes. "Talk to me." The lead engineer frowned. "I am not sure." Then the engine crossed 9,000 RPM. Suddenly a cluster of alerts illuminated the telemetry wall. Not catastrophic. Not dangerous. But completely unexpected. Sensors throughout the powertrain began reporting inconsistent readings. Cooling pressure shifted. Performance output fluctuated. Fuel mapping started correcting itself every few seconds. The driver radioed in. "The car feels strange. Still running, but something is off." The room fell silent. Victoria stepped closer to the display. "Bring him in." Nobody argued. Minutes later, Car 7 rolled back into the garage. Mechanics surrounded it immediately. Laptops connected. Panels removed. Diagnostics launched. 2 hours passed. Then 3. Every system was inspected. Every component tested. Yet nobody could identify the source of the anomaly. The deeper they searched, the less sense the data made. By mid-afternoon, frustration had replaced confidence. Engineers filled whiteboards with theories. None survived scrutiny. Walter finally looked toward Victoria. "There is one person who might understand what we are seeing." Victoria already knew the name before he spoke it. And for the first time since becoming chief executive officer, she found herself wondering whether the man she had fired knew something everyone else had missed. The atmosphere inside Hayes Velocity Racing grew heavier as the afternoon stretched into evening. Every engineer who touched Car 7 arrived at the same frustrating conclusion. Something was wrong, but nobody could explain exactly what it was. The data contradicted itself. One moment the engine appeared flawless. The next, tiny inconsistencies emerged and vanished before anyone could isolate the source. Victoria stood alone in the executive conference room overlooking the garage floor. Below her, technicians moved between workstations under bright white lights. Coffee cups accumulated beside laptops. Tempers remained controlled, but anxiety was beginning to show. The Desert Crown Grand Prix was only days away. Failure was not part of the plan. A knock sounded at the glass door. Walter Jensen stepped inside carrying a thick binder covered in dust. "What is that?" Victoria asked. Walter placed it on the table. "Something I found in storage." Victoria opened the cover. Inside were engineering schematics dating back nearly 15 years. Hand-drawn notes filled the margins. Complex calculations stretched across yellowing pages. Every detail reflected extraordinary precision. Victoria flipped through several sheets before stopping. Her eyes narrowed. A signature appeared at the bottom of the page. Ethan Brooks. She looked up immediately. "Why would maintenance have access to original race car blueprints?" Walter did not answer right away. Instead, He slowly opened another binder. Then another. More schematics. More signatures. More notebooks. The same name appeared again and again. Ethan Brooks. Victoria felt a strange chill despite the warm room. How many of these are his? Walter exhaled slowly. All of them. Silence settled between them. Victoria stared at the documents. That cannot be right. I thought the same thing. Walter slid a faded photograph across the table. It showed a younger Ethan standing beside a championship-winning race car surrounded by smiling engineers and drivers. Unlike the quiet maintenance worker she remembered, this version of Ethan looked confident and respected. His name was printed beneath the image. Chief Design Engineer. Victoria blinked twice. No one told me this. Walter gave a sad smile. Most people here are too young to remember. Victoria turned another page. Patent filings. Design awards. Technical publications. Every document pointed toward the same impossible conclusion. Ethan had not simply worked at Hayes Velocity Racing. He had helped build it. Why would someone with this background spend years maintaining equipment? She asked quietly. Walter looked through the conference room window toward the garage floor. After his wife passed away, everything changed. Victoria remained silent. Walter continued. He stopped chasing recognition. Stopped attending conferences. Stopped pursuing promotions. He only cared about raising Lily. The room suddenly felt much larger. Much quieter. Victoria looked back at the photograph. She remembered Ethan standing calmly beside the engine. She remembered the certainty in his voice. She remembered firing him without asking a single question. Down in the garage, another diagnostic test failed. Frustrated voices echoed across the floor. Nobody noticed the chief executive officer sitting perfectly still with an old photograph in her hands. For the first time, Victoria Hayes was no longer wondering whether Ethan knew something they did not. She was beginning to realize the far more uncomfortable truth. The company had spent an entire day trying to solve a problem that might only be understood by the man who created the machine in the first place. Long after most employees had gone home, a single light remained on inside Victoria Hayes's office. The city shimmered beyond the glass walls while stacks of old engineering records covered her desk. She should have been reviewing race strategy. Instead, she spent hour after hour turning pages filled with Ethan Brooks's handwriting. Every file seemed to reveal something new. One patent led to another. One design breakthrough connected to three more. The deeper she looked, the more impossible the story became. At 28, Ethan had redesigned an entire cooling architecture that competitors spent years trying to imitate. At 30, he helped create the power management system that delivered the company's first national championship. At 32, he authored a technical paper still referenced by engineering programs across the country. Victoria leaned back slowly. She had spent years studying the company's history. Yet somehow she had never truly learned the name behind many of its greatest achievements. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Walter Jensen stepped into the office carrying a cardboard archive box. "There is more," he said. Victoria almost laughed. "There is always more, apparently." Walter placed the box on the desk. Inside were photographs. Hundreds of them. Championship celebrations. Engineering conferences. Factory openings. Ethan appeared again and again. Sometimes standing beside race cars. Sometimes mentoring young engineers. Sometimes smiling beside executives who had long since retired. "He was everywhere," Victoria whispered. Walter nodded. "Back then, people thought he would eventually run the company." Victoria studied one photograph in particular. Ethan stood beside a woman with bright eyes and a warm smile. They were holding a newborn wrapped in a pink blanket. "His wife?" Victoria asked. "Emily," Walter replied quietly. "They were inseparable." The room fell silent. Victoria continued turning pages. Then the photographs changed. Fewer public appearances. Fewer celebrations. Fewer smiles. Eventually there were none at all. That was after Emily got sick, Walter said. When she passed, Ethan stopped caring about titles. Victoria looked down at a later photograph. Ethan sat in a folding chair watching a little girl race a homemade go-kart across a parking lot. His expression carried more pride than any championship image she had seen. "Lily," she said softly. Walter smiled. His whole world. Outside the office windows, darkness settled across the city. Inside the garage below, engineers continued searching for answers. New simulations were launched. New theories emerged. Every one of them failed. Shortly after midnight, another report arrived. The engine anomaly had become worse. Small fluctuations were now appearing at lower RPM levels. Nothing dangerous. Nothing dramatic. But enough to threaten race performance. Victoria read the report twice. Then she closed the folder. For the first time in years, she admitted something she hated admitting. Her team did not have the answer. The answer had walked out the front door carrying a worn toolbox and a quiet sense of dignity. She looked again at the photograph of Ethan teaching Lily beside the little go-kart. Suddenly all the awards and patents seemed secondary. The real mystery was not how a brilliant engineer became a maintenance worker. The real mystery was how someone could give up so much recognition without bitterness. And somewhere across town, completely unaware that his past was being uncovered piece by piece, Ethan sat at his kitchen table helping his daughter finish a small model race car while the company he helped build struggled to understand the machine only he truly knew. The following morning began with growing pressure. News of the unexplained performance issue had already reached several sponsors, and rumors spread faster than facts. Inside Hayes Velocity Racing, engineers moved with exhausted determination. Screens displayed streams of telemetry. Whiteboards filled with equations covered the walls. Yet every path led to another dead end. Shortly after 9 o'clock, Victoria entered the executive boardroom for an emergency meeting. The atmosphere was tense. Senior managers sat around a long, polished table while financial projections glowed across a presentation screen. "If the problem is not resolved before race day, what happens?" Victoria asked. The finance director cleared his throat. "Several performance incentives disappear." Another executive added, "2 sponsors have already requested updates." A third voice spoke carefully. "Investors are beginning to ask questions." Silence followed. Victoria looked through the glass wall toward the engineering center below. For years the company had been known for precision and excellence. Now uncertainty was spreading through every department. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan Brooks spent the morning exactly as he always had when he was not working. He stood in the driveway beside Lily, helping her adjust the alignment on the small model race car they had been building together. The sun reflected off the chrome trim while a gentle breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass through the neighborhood. "Try it now," Ethan said. Lily released the car. It rolled smoothly down the sidewalk. Her face brightened immediately. "It works." Ethan smiled. "You fixed it." "We fixed it." "No," Ethan said softly. "I just showed you where to look." Lily grinned. "That is what you always do." Ethan laughed quietly. For a moment, the worries of the outside world seemed very far away. Back at company headquarters, another stress simulation ended badly. The engine remained operational, but efficiency dropped sharply whenever the RPM climbed. Engineers reviewed data repeatedly. Nobody understood why. Frustration grew. Confidence faded. Shortly after lunch, Walter Jensen entered Victoria's office carrying a thin folder. "You should see this." Victoria opened it immediately. Inside was a collection of old employee evaluations written by former executives. Every review described Ethan the same way. Brilliant. Humble. Reliable. Exceptional mentor. One comment caught her attention. She read it twice. Ethan Brooks possesses a rare ability to predict failures long before instrumentation can detect them. Victoria slowly lowered the paper. The sentence lingered in her thoughts. Predict failures before instrumentation could detect them. Suddenly Ethan's warning no longer seemed remarkable. It seemed obvious. He had seen something everyone else missed. The realization settled heavily across her shoulders. Hours passed. More diagnostics failed. More theories collapsed. By late afternoon, Victoria stood alone in the garage staring at Car 7 beneath the bright overhead lights. The vehicle looked perfect. Beautiful. Powerful. Yet somewhere beneath its polished surface hid a problem no one could solve. She remembered Ethan standing in this exact spot. Calm. Respectful. Certain. Then she remembered how quickly she had dismissed him. For several long seconds she said nothing. Finally she reached for her phone. Walter looked up from across the garage. "What are you doing?" Victoria held the phone in her hand but did not dial immediately. Her pride fought against the decision. Then she exhaled slowly. "Something I should have done yesterday." Victoria stared at Ethan's number for nearly 30 seconds before pressing call. The line rang once. Twice. 3 times. Then voicemail answered. She ended the call without leaving a message. For reasons she could not explain, speaking to him suddenly felt more difficult than facing a room full of investors. An hour later she found herself driving through a quiet residential neighborhood far removed from corporate offices, racing circuits, and executive boardrooms. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across neatly kept lawns. Children rode bicycles along sidewalks. Sprinklers clicked rhythmically across green grass. Everything felt strangely peaceful. Victoria slowed as her navigation announced the address. The house was modest. Clean. Ordinary. Nothing about it suggested the man living there had helped create one of the most successful racing organizations in America. She parked at the curb and sat motionless for a moment. Then she stepped out. Before she reached the front door, laughter drifted from the backyard. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just genuine. Victoria followed the sound around the side of the house and stopped. Ethan stood beside a wooden workbench under a small shade canopy. Lily stood next to him holding a screwdriver almost as carefully as a surgeon. Between them sat a homemade go-kart frame. "Try tightening that one," Ethan said. Lily nodded seriously and adjusted the bolt. "Like this?" "Exactly like that." Victoria remained silent for a moment, watching. There was no audience here. No recognition. No trophies. No executives applauding his achievements. Yet Ethan looked more content than anyone she had seen inside company headquarters. Lily noticed her first. "Dad?" Ethan turned. For a brief second. Surprise crossed his face. Then it disappeared. "Ms. Hayes." Victoria suddenly felt unprepared despite rehearsing the conversation during the entire drive. "I hope I am not interrupting." Ethan glanced at Lily. "We are almost finished." Lily looked between them. Smart enough to recognize adult tension immediately. "I can work on the wheels," she announced before carrying tools toward the garage. Victoria watched her leave. "She is remarkable." Ethan smiled softly. "She gets that from her mother." The smile faded as silence settled between them. Finally Victoria spoke. "I know who you are." Ethan laughed quietly. Not mockingly. Just gently. "Most people do." "That is not what I mean." She looked directly at him. "I found the engineering records. The patents. The designs. The championship programs." Ethan rested a hand on the workbench. "I see. Why did nobody tell me?" "Because it stopped mattering years ago." Victoria struggled to understand that answer. "How can something like that stop mattering?" Ethan looked toward Lily working beside the garage. His expression softened. "Because some things matter more." A breeze moved through the yard. Wind chimes stirred softly beneath the porch roof. Victoria followed his gaze toward his daughter. For the first time she truly understood what Walter had been trying to explain. Ethan had not walked away because he failed. He had walked away because he chose something he valued more than recognition. Something no title could replace. And standing there in the fading sunlight, Victoria realized the person she had dismissed as a maintenance worker might possess not only the answer to the company's problem, but a wisdom she herself had never learned. Victoria stood quietly beside the workbench while the evening sun painted long golden shadows across the backyard. For a few moments neither she nor Ethan spoke. The silence felt different now. Less like tension. More like understanding. Finally Victoria took a slow breath. The problem is getting worse. Ethan looked down at the unfinished go-kart. I assumed it would. The engineers cannot find it. I know. The answer came so calmly that Victoria almost laughed. You always know, do you not? Ethan smiled faintly. No. Just sometimes. Lily glanced over from the garage. Dad always notices things nobody else sees. Ethan shook his head gently. That is because most people are looking for the wrong thing. Victoria looked directly at him. Will you come back? Ethan did not answer immediately. Instead, he tightened one final bolt on the go-kart frame before setting the wrench aside. Why? He asked. Victoria hesitated. A week earlier she would have given a corporate answer. A strategic answer. A financial answer. But none of those felt honest anymore. Because I made a mistake. Ethan studied her expression. For the first time since arriving, Victoria looked less like a chief executive officer and more like a person carrying genuine regret. The breeze stirred softly through the trees. Somewhere down the street a dog barked. The neighborhood remained peaceful and ordinary. The company needs you. Victoria continued. Ethan glanced toward Lily. The company survived before me. Not this time. Her voice remained quiet. Please. Several seconds passed. Then Ethan looked at his daughter. What do you think? Lily smiled. You always help people when they need it. Ethan laughed softly. You make a difficult argument. Early the next morning, Ethan walked through the doors of Hayes Velocity Racing for the first time since being fired. Conversation stopped almost immediately. Mechanics looked up from workstations. Engineers exchanged glances. Nobody knew exactly what to say. Ethan simply nodded politely and continued toward Car 7. Victoria and the entire engineering team followed behind him. The garage felt strangely quiet. Ethan opened the engine compartment and spent several minutes examining components without speaking. No laptops. No presentations. No complicated diagnostic software. Just observation. Then he pointed toward a small assembly hidden deep within the cooling architecture. There. Several engineers leaned closer. That cannot be it, one said. Ethan smiled. It is. Another engineer frowned. We checked that twice. You checked the part, Ethan replied. You did not check the interaction. Silence followed. Ethan picked up a marker and sketched a simple diagram on a nearby whiteboard. Within moments the room grew still. One by one, engineers realized what they were seeing. The flaw was not in a component. It was hidden in a chain reaction involving temperature expansion, fluid pressure, and vibration harmonics. The issue only appeared under a very specific operating condition. Exactly at 9,000 RPM. Walter Jensen slowly lowered his glasses. Nobody spoke. Victoria stared at the diagram. The solution looked almost embarrassingly simple now that it had been explained. Yet dozens of experts had missed it. Ethan capped the marker and stepped back. That should solve it. For several long seconds the garage remained completely silent. Not because people were confused. Because they finally understood who had been standing among them all along. 3 days later the grandstands surrounding the Desert Crown Grand Prix stretched beneath a brilliant Nevada sky. Tens of thousands of fans filled the venue. Sponsor banners fluttered in the warm wind. Television crews moved through the paddock. Everywhere people looked, excitement and anticipation filled the air. Inside the Hayes Velocity Racing garage, however, the mood was different. It was quieter. More focused. The repair Ethan identified had worked perfectly. Every simulation passed. Every test delivered flawless results. Yet the biggest change was not inside the race car. It was inside the people standing around it. Engineers who once barely noticed Ethan now greeted him with genuine respect. Mechanics asked questions and listened carefully to every answer. Even Walter Jensen seemed lighter, as though a missing piece of company history had finally returned to its rightful place. When race time arrived, Car 7 rolled onto the track with confidence. The engine responded smoothly. Temperatures remained stable. Performance exceeded expectations. Lap after lap, the car delivered exactly what Ethan predicted it would. By the final stretch, the team stood watching the monitors in complete concentration. Then the checkered flag waved. Cheers erupted throughout the garage. Crew members embraced. Engineers celebrated. Years of effort had produced another championship victory. Yet amid the excitement, Ethan remained calm. He simply smiled and accepted a quick handshake from Walter before stepping quietly toward the back of the garage. The race was over. For him, that seemed enough. But the day was not finished. An hour later, reporters, sponsors, executives, and employees gathered inside the media center for the championship press conference. Bright lights filled the room. Cameras pointed toward the stage. Victoria Hayes stepped to the podium while applause echoed across the hall. She waited patiently until the room became silent. Then she surprised everyone. "Before we discuss today's victory," she said, "there is something more important that needs to be said." The room immediately grew still. Victoria looked toward the side of the stage. "Ethan, would you join me?" Confused whispers spread through the audience as Ethan slowly walked forward. Many reporters recognized the name from recent conversations around the garage. Few understood the full story. Victoria took a breath. "Several days ago, I made the worst leadership decision of my career." The room became even quieter. "I judged someone based on his position instead of his character. I ignored experience because it arrived in work clothes instead of an executive title." Ethan lowered his eyes slightly. Victoria continued, "What most people do not know is that many of the innovations that built this company began with one man." She turned toward him. "The cooling systems. The performance architecture. The championship platforms. The engineering breakthroughs that made Hayes Velocity Racing successful." A large screen behind the stage illuminated. Old photographs appeared. Ethan beside prototype vehicles. Ethan mentoring young engineers. Ethan standing beside championship teams. Gasps moved through the audience. Victoria's voice softened. "The man standing beside me did not simply help this company succeed. He helped create everything it became." Silence filled the room. Not the silence of confusion. The silence of respect. Then someone started clapping. Another joined. Then another. Within seconds the entire room rose to its feet. The standing ovation seemed endless. Ethan looked out across the crowd before his eyes settled on a familiar face near the front row. Lily stood smiling beside Walter. Pride shined in her eyes. Ethan smiled back. In that moment the trophies, the headlines, and the applause all seemed secondary. Because the greatest legacy he ever built was never a race car. It was the daughter who learned from his example that true greatness does not demand attention. It earns respect through quiet dignity, steady character, and the willingness to do the right thing even when nobody is watching.